So we know what the title is, Dancing with Shakespeare, Wordplay, Image and Choreography. The span of Shakespeare's life from 1564 to 1616 matches the mainstream of a system of dancing which we identify as late Renaissance. His plays were enjoyed at both the court of Queen Elizabeth and the court of James I, and both courts enjoyed the same practice of social dancing. Shakespeare's plays also included masking episodes, but the masques of the Jacobean court had key differences from those of the Tudor court, a difference which Shakespeare uses in his plays, and we'll come to that in the second half of the talk. But my first topic is dance as wordplay. Let's start with the Galliard, for example, in Twelfth Night. So it's Sir Toby Belch and Sir Andrew Aguecheek, and Toby says, "What is thy excellence in a Galliard, knight? Faith, I can cut a caper, and I can cut the mutton to it. And I think I have the back trick as well as any man in Illyria. Wherefore are these things hid? Why dost thou not go to church in a Galliard and come home in a Caranto? My very walk should be a jig. I would not so much as make water, but in a syncopace. What dost thou mean? I did think by the excellent constitution of thy leg, it was formed under the star of a Galliard." So these two gentlemen ought to be able to dance a Galliard at any revel. The central activity of a revel was the dancing by solo couples in turn of the improvised dances known throughout Europe, Galliards, Carantos, the Passamezzo pavan, the Spanish pavan, the Canaries and La Voltas. As the Galliard was the most frequently danced and widespread of these, we have sources to aid us in dancing along with Shakespeare and understanding the references. The basic step was called Cinque Passi in Italian, Cinq Pas in French, and Syncopes in English, as it comprised 5 steps to 6 counts of music, 4 springy kicks on 1, 2, 3, 4, a preparation on 2 feet, on the 5 for the high jump, landing on both feet on 6. And this was the foundation of an infinite number of variations, athletic ones for men, with turns on the toe, capriole or capers in English, which are jumps moving the feet back and forth or crossing over while in the air, and jumps turning several times while aloft, while for the women, sustained and dexterous movements of the feet were their variations. And this slide just indicates some of the evidence. A French source for the steps fitted to the music, and many of you will recognize that as from Abo. Little figures as illustration. One of several Italian sources in great detail, which gives fuller information on the Cinque Passi, but not directly linked to musical stave. And there are variations, lots of them, on the basic steps, and this source gave more than 100 possible variations. And luckily, English sketchy information confirms that the English Galliard was very similar. And a trick was a variation, and Sir Andrew's back trick may have been something like Arbo's Ruard, which is a kickback, or Caroso's Campanella, in which the leg is swung back. Sir Toby Belch makes a pun on caper for the dexterous dance movement and caper for those tangy pickled buds, which add relish to lamb and mutton. He is, of course, making a mockery of Sir Andrew with the suggestion of going to and from church with dance steps, a completely unseemly procedure. And then Belch falls into vulgarity with the pun on sink or basin and making water, in other words, urinating. We can see how to dance along with Toby Belch and Andrew Aguecheek with a video of 2 of my former dance students, and they are giving a sample of variations, and look out for some back tricks. And that was danced to a typical English tune of 24, cinque pas, cinque passi, played twice. That may be considered 2 Galliards perhaps, and we must remember that Queen Elizabeth, in her late age, was said to dance 6 or 7 Galliards before breakfast. Now, the many meanings of the word measure prompted several punning exchanges in the plays. One of the most extended comes in the last act of Love's Labour's Lost, as the ladies thwart the attempt by the king and his companions to woo them in a masque dance. The king, Ferdinand, is sending a messenger over to the ladies. Say to her that we have measured many miles to tread a measure with her on this grass. They don't respond, so he says, then in our measure do but vouchsafe one change. Then the music plays for dancing, but the ladies stop the dancing and Rosaline says, curtsy, sweethearts, and so the measure ends. More measure of this measure, be not nice. We can afford no more at such a price. And here the word measure has the general meaning of a dance, and it's punned with the notion of measuring a distance or a length of cloth. And a similar pun is used in Romeo and Juliet. But let them measure us by what they will. We'll measure them a measure and be gone. Another significant use of the word measure, not as a pun, but as a simile for marriage, is in Much Ado About Nothing, which I'm sure you all know this bit. For hear me, hero, wooing, wedding and repenting is as a Scotch jig, a measure and a syncopace. The first suit is hot and hasty, like a Scotch jig, and full as fantastical. The wedding, mannerly modest, as a measure, full of state and ancientry. And then comes repentance, and with his bad legs, falls into the syncopace faster and faster, till he sinks into his grave. We've met the syncopace already. Here Beatrice, though, is thinking of dancing just the basic step round the room, which can resemble a limping action with the pause before the high jump. There are records of the company dancing just the step around the room, both at the royal court itself and at the Inns of Court. We don't know much about the jig, also referenced by Sir Toby, but generally considered wild. And it was a solo dance mostly, not a social dance, not part of the court or genteel repertoire. The Scotch epithet has been puzzling, and I'm currently inclined to think that it identifies the jig as originally from Scotland. Beatrice is surely thinking, though, of a specific dance in her measure full of state and ancientry, rather than just a general reference. And this brings us to a dance genre vernacular to England, in contrast to the international genres of Galliard and Coranto. A specific group of dances called measures were danced at both the Tudor and Jacobean courts as the first stage of a revel, before the Galliards and Corantos. We know how to do several of these measures only from 8 manuscripts, which are little more than brief notes dating from around 1560 and the last around 1670. but all covering the same group of dances. And here are two examples of these manuscripts, and they clearly show marks of having been folded up, possibly put in a pocket. They also happen to be one of the main sources of wider dancing, just more than the measures, for England. We think these manuscripts are the aid memoirs for the men leading the revels at the Inns of Court. The inns remain the centres for legal education and practice in London: Gray's Inn, Lincoln's Inn, Middle Temple and Inner Temple. In the 16th and 17th centuries, there were two kinds of members of the Inns of Court. One group were studying to be and practising as professional lawyers, including the judges. The other group were young gentlemen from English families, sent to learn enough law to manage their estates, but also to enjoy the pleasures of London. So they were a kind of finishing school for young men who could study with the best dancing, fencing and riding masters, go to the theatre and even have access to the court itself. The inns had developed a strong collegiate life, with dancing a regular practice, all men together. Two special occasions were the revels on All Hallows Day, November the 1st, and Candlemas, February the 2nd, marking the start and end of the Christmas season. Each inn, each year, appointed a master of the revels and two men to help him organise the customary dancing of a particular group of 8 measures, which they called the old measures. The lawyers' revels were followed by post-revels, when Galliards, Corantos and Lavoltas were danced when women were present, and the young men of the inns had a reputation for excellence in dancing. And here's a few extracts from one of those documents, where you can see the list of the 8 old measures: the Quadripavan, Turkilone, the Earl of Essex measures, Tintinel, the Old Almain, the Queen's Almain, Cecilia, which is an Almain, and Black, which they danced one after the other. And this document is one that has more on the post-revels, such as Syncopace, Galliard, Coranto, Pavan, Spanish Pavan, the French La Volta, and another kind of measure that is not one of the old measures, Lady Leighton's. The post-revels could also include a play or a masque, such as Shakespeare's The Comedy of Errors at Gray's Inn in 1594 and Twelfth Night in 1602. The 5th of the 8 measures was the Earl of Essex measure, and I'm going to show you a short bit of video which shows how it was danced in a column, and the short pattern of steps that fit the phrases of the music very closely. And the word measure, which is multivalent, is also the term for the regular relationship between the step and the phrase of music. And I've sketched it out for you here. A single step, 1 pace, fits 1 bar of music, and the double step fits 2. And that is found throughout Italian, French and English records. Now, the Earl of Essex is fairly straightforward, but other measures in the group of 8 had some basic figuring, crossing over into the partner's place, for example, or turning on the spot. But one thing that is, the couples remain in their same place. They never change places with another couple. So I don't have a group of men, sadly, to dance the whole thing, but a group of ladies. and in the group of 8 measures, that would have only been danced twice. Now, English measures were choreographed versions of the very simple processional Almains of France. But actually the first dance of the list of the old measures was the pavane, exactly the same as the pavane dance to open a ball at the French court, as recorded by Arbeau. Across the 8 extant manuscripts, we can see the same fundamental pattern for the dance, which I've just copied out for the first one. And it is called the quadran pavane in the last 6. But at first it was called simply the pavane. And then in the second in date of our manuscripts, it was called the passing measures pavane. As a simple processional dance, this is clearly not the more challenging improvised form of the passamezzo pavane that we find recorded by Caroso, but it more likely refers to the chordal progression known as the passamezzo antico, and that was superseded soon after by the passamezzo moderno, which was also known as the quadran pavane. And this explanation brings me to one of Toby Belch's famous expletives in the last act of Twelfth Night. He has sustained a small wound, but Sir Andrew has told him that the surgeon is drunk and cannot treat him. Then he's a rogue and a passy measures pavin. I hate a drunken rogue, says Sir Toby. So much ink has been spilt in explanations for this phrase. I suggest, like many an insult, it's based on the plosive sounds, passy measures pavin. And maybe if the vowel sound is changed in passy, I, we may have a Belch vulgarity, as in syncopace. I'll briefly note other social dances used to convey images of vigour and liveliness in different ways. The Henry V one, they bid us to the English dancing schools and teach la voltas high and swift carantos, saying our grace is only in our heels and that we are most lofty runaways. So an image of dance that creates one of cowardice. In Love's Labour's Lost, Moth mocks his master. Will you win your love with a French brawl? How meanest thou, brawling in French? No, my complete master, but to jig off a tune at the tongue's end, canary to it with your feet, humour it with turning up your eyelids. So again, a pun with on the English pronunciation of branle, to brawl, and brawling as an fighting situation. And in All's Well That Ends Well, we have Lafeu, who promises to cure the French king with a medicine, and the medicine is in fact the lovely Helena. I have seen a medicine that's able to breathe life into a stone, quicken a rock, and make you dance canary with sprightly fire and motion. So each of these gives us some insight as well into the physicality of each dance, the nimble footwork and vigorous action of the canary, for example. Now, Shakespeare included dances that didn't belong to the contemporary repertoire, such as the drunken circular dance in Antony and Cleopatra, which he calls Egyptian bacchanals, or the Bergamasque dance by the Mechanicals after their play of Pyramus and Thisbe in A Midsummer Night's Dream. His audience, though, were very familiar with the notion of fairies dancing in a ring. In The Merry Wives of Windsor, the human characters pinch and mock Falstaff by pretending to be fairies. As they say, in our dance of custom, round about the oak, of Herne the Hunter, let us not forget. A dance of mischief. The fairy dances of Midsummer Night's Dream are dances of real power. We first realise this as the quarrel between Oberon and Titania is revealed in Act 2, Scene 1. Oberon has been disturbing the dances of Titania and her train, with the result that the natural world has become disordered. And a lovely passage of which we just give an extract. Note again the pun on brawl. And never since the middle summer's spring met we on hill, in dale, forest or mead, by paved fountain or by rushy brook, or in the beached margent of the sea, to dance our ringlets to the whistling wind, but with thy brawls thou hast disturbed our sport. Therefore the winds, piping to us in vain, as in revenge, have sucked up from the sea contagious fogs. And the result, she continues to tell Oberon, is continual rain, leading to failing crops, diseased animals, and sickness among humans. The seasons eventually all confused. So the disruption of dancing has led to the disruption of the world. By the end of the play, of course, the couple are reconciled and join in a dance to bless the palace of Theseus and all the other reconciled human couples about to marry. And Titania says, hand in hand with fairy grace will we sing and bless this place. And the stage direction is Oberon leading the fairies sing and dance. Representations of the dancing of fairies were not uncommon in Elizabethan England, in outdoor entertainments and indoor dramas. Often played and danced by schoolboys, Queen Elizabeth was greeted on several progresses by fairy characters, considered the denizens of the English countryside, including an entertainment of fairies when she visited Hengrave Hall in Suffolk in 1578. In contrast to dance as a force of good, the witches in Macbeth danced to summon evil powers. A novel concept in England at the time, and I'll return to those dances later. So moving from just social dancing to the masque. The dance theatre of the court was the masque, a completely separate genre of performance from the drama. Shakespeare was the first playwright to use masque episodes in his plays, employing three of the evolving types: the continental masquerata, the Tudor masque of Henry VIII and Elizabeth, and the Jacobean combination of masque and anti-masque, plus a fourth hybrid form of his own. The masquerata originated in Italy and was taken up by Henry VIII as a young king at the same time roughly as François Ier of France, where the genre became known as a masquerade or a ballet. The continental form is nicely illustrated in this image, a sketch from the album Amicorum belonging to Moises Wallens, a memento of travel, a combination, if you like, of autograph and photograph album. It depicts four disguised men entering a hall where the company have been feasting. The first two are wearing vizards, as you can see, with their noses poking out, and they've got swathed cloaks as a bit of a disguise, and their hats pulled well down over their faces. They are clearly dancing in. And note that they also have lighted torches in their hands. Behind them come two musicians with only masks as a disguise, one playing a lute, the other playing a violin. And this matches the custom of young men roaming the streets and entering unexpectedly into houses to dance for the company and then invite the ladies to join them in more dancing. This was popular at carnival time in Catholic countries for the final fling before the sobrieties of Lent. Shakespeare uses this activity in several of his comedies set in Italy, but the best known of such scenes is the tragedy of Romeo and Juliet. His friends persuade Romeo to gate crash the Capulet supper so that he can see the fair Rosaline. A gang of young men enter, wearing vizards, with torch bearers accompanying them, ready to make their entrance. Romeo changes his mind at the last minute. Give me a torch. I'm not for this ambling. Being but heavy, I will bear the light. Nay, gentle Romeo, we must have you dance. Not I, believe me. You have dancing shoes with nimble soles. I have a soul of lead, so stakes me to the ground, I cannot move. It is interesting to trace this back through Shakespeare's sources. He had read a narrative poem by Arthur Brooke of 1562, in which Romeus is a masker, who is found out when all unmask. By making Romeo a torchbearer, Shakespeare has him observe Juliet from the side, expressing to the audience his innermost thoughts about her beauty. Brooke's sources in turn, probably not known by Shakespeare, come from French and Italian writers, such as Luigi da Porta of around 1530, who place the encounter between Romeo and Juliet in a torch dance, a ballo della torcia, called in French a branle de la torche, a dance in which a partner is chosen by the light of a handheld torch. And such a form is not recorded in England, so an exotic thing. By using the mascherata, Shakespeare is helping his original audience to understand that the setting is exotic and Italian. The danger of the mascherata is apparent in the play, as Romeo has gained access to the household of a rival family, triggering the tragedy that ensued. Like Romeo and his companions, the disguise of a vizard and a swathed cloak is sufficient for the maskers in Much Ado About Nothing. Although the men maskers in Love's Labour's Lost come disguised as Muscovites. And these mask contexts allow relationships and complications to be revealed. In Much Ado, the fourth pair of maskers who come together are Beatrice and Benedick, who will marry in the end, and the confusion and tribulation is set up in their lively exchange. But their conversation is curtailed by the sound of dance music. "We must follow the leaders," cries Benedick. So all four couples dance in a column, then leave the stage, with all problems resolved and several marriages to come. Sorry, wrong way of saying that. With all problems resolved and several marriages to come, Much Ado ends with a dance. Benedict calling, "Strike up, pipers." And so here, dancing in couples indicates the resolution of strife into harmony. And here's Branagh's famous ending, which is more romanticized and less symbolic. Now, this impromptu mascherata practice was not allowed in England. Henry VIII passed a law in 1417 declaring night walking in disguise illegal, and that the populace should confine themselves to honest merriment within his own house dwelling. So the English form of the mascherata became an indoor organised event, and by very good fortune we have a painting that captures the Tudor masque, matching other sources of information. And this is the Unton portrait, which can be seen in the National Portrait Gallery in London. It is commissioned by the widow of Sir Henry Unton, who was ambassador to France. Sorry, didn't mean to do that. I meant to do that just to be fancy. Where have it got to? With a little pointer. So his widow commissioned it. He was ambassador to France for Elizabeth I. And here he is in the centre, larger than life. It memorialises his life and death. On the right, here is his life with the sun shining over it. And on this side is the scenes of his funeral, death and entombment with the moon shining over it. You can read a lot more about the painting on the National Portrait Gallery website, and they've recently done a lot of work on it. But for now, we will focus on the scene of his life, which includes what is thought to be here his wedding feast right in the middle with a masque scene. So the slightly larger female figure is Lady Unton. You'll see a little group by her here, a man in green who's presenting her with some piece of paper. two smaller figures of children, and a man playing a drum. You'll notice that the two men and many of the others have red faces, which are the vizards. And if you see the picture in life, you can really clearly see that they're not faces, but vizards, masks. The drummer would have been heard outside the door, signalling the arrival of strangers, and the procession then entered, headed by the figure in green, who would have recited poems or a long speech announcing the arrival of these strangers. And he was known as the truchman or translator. The two children are torchbearers, and you can see others of them there. They are wearing bodysuits to look like naked cherubs, one in pink and one more exotically in black, with vizards or face paintings to match. Behind the second pair of torchbearers here are two more figures. Here is one dressed as Mercury with the winged hat, wings on his shoulders, and his caduceus, which is his staff of office there. And then the other as the goddess Diana with long hair, which depicts a virgin, and you might just make out the crescent moon, which is her symbol. And then three pairs more in much the same dresses and headdresses, which we might then suggest could be called the followers of Diana, each escorted by torchbearers. Now, Mercury and Diana will have been further speakers, developing the theme of the whole show. And a conventional theme of a wedding masque is the regret of Diana, the goddess of chastity, at losing a virgin to marriage, but reflecting on the necessity for the production of children. So the little torchbearer cherubs hint at that. And the six female figures, and I'm pretty sure that they are ladies of the same rank as the Untons, will dance a specially composed masque dance once they're in the space. Of course, this is all artificially spaced for the picture. And then they would invite gentlemen from the company to dance with them, initiating an evening's dancing. In the centre of the scene, the painter has depicted the music ensemble, a broken consort. They are playing, going anti-clockwise from here, at the top right, a cittern, a lute, a flute, a treble violin, and the one with the back to us, probably a tenor violin or violin, and a bass viol. Now, Shakespeare adopts this Tudor form of the indoor masque in his play All Is True, formerly known as Henry VIII. It is for the encounter of Henry with Anne Boleyn, and the setting is York Place, Cardinal Wolsey's palace. And of course, Henry is not aware of who's present. He's entering as one of the maskers. Suddenly a noise is heard outside, which announces a noble troop of strangers come as ambassadors to Cardinal Wolsey, speaking no English. King Henry and his party enter disguised as shepherds, probably very glamorous shepherds, and it is announced that they crave leave to view these ladies and entreat an hour of revels with them. The king dances with Anne Boleyn and falls in love with her. As in Romeo and Juliet, Shakespeare is using the mask dance as the setting for a close, emotional but fateful encounter. Now, it's important to understand that an English court masque was exclusively danced by noblemen or women and was part of a social revel with their peers. This meant that a masque was exclusive to the nobility and some upper gentry. The speakers and devisers of the Tudor masque were usually noblemen or women too. The only professionals involved in the performance were the musicians. In the last years of Elizabeth's court, masques with their very expensive costumes were used less and less often for the Christmas season, in favour of the cheaper option of a visiting company of players, such as Shakespeare's The Lord Chamberlain's Men. However, when James VI of Scotland took the throne in 1603, he refreshed the masque to become an equally, if not more important part of court hospitality. James saw the masque as an important tool of national and international diplomacy, as the themes could advertise, and some of these will sound familiar, the mission of the new dynasty, themes of the unity of the island, a policy of peace, of the king's care for the health and wealth of the nation, and the secure dynastic future of having 2 male heirs. In brief, he succeeded in expanding the magnificence of the masque by various means, such as increasing the musical establishment, employing professional poets such as Ben Jonson for the spoken part to make it more animated, and employing a single ingenious artisan to design innovative sets and costumes, Inigo Jones. But now we'll focus on innovations in the dance content. The number of dances by the royal and noble maskers were increased from just 1 to 3 or 4, and the number of maskers increased from 6 to 12 or even 16. And of course that was supported by a larger number of dancing masters employed by the court. A further but very controversial expansion of the dance content was achieved by introducing professionals to dance in 1609 in a section that came to be called an anti-masque, to indicate that it was not a proper masque by the elite. In some way, it was not a dance. So the anti-masque satyrs of the Masque Oberon of 1611 were introduced into the sheep shearing scene of The Winter's Tale. It was given a little context as if presented by local countrymen as an amusing divertisement. The dance of country people of the Masque of the Inner Temple and Gray's Inn was transferred wholesale as the Morris dance in Two Noble Kinsmen. And as we have the music for these anti-masques, we could recreate or attempt the choreographies. These transfers from court masque to play are well known and, I would say, fairly obvious. So I would like to discuss a less obvious connection between the Jacobean anti-masque and Shakespeare's plays. The first experiment with professionals as dancers was for the Masque of Queens, 1609. The men appeared as 12 hags or witches, figures of insurrection and treason, also modelled on the ancient Greek Furies. They created an evil contrast to the 12 lady maskers headed by Anne of Denmark, all representing powerful and virtuous queens of history. And a leader of the hags was their dame, again setting up a direct opposition to the queen. They did 2 grotesque dances, and this is Jonson's words about it. And in the process of this, he mentions the maker of the dance, Master Jeremy Hearn, whose right it is here to be named. So he is describing the second of their 2 dances here, and as you can see, it says, in the heat of their dance, on the sudden was heard a sound of loud music, with which the hags quite vanished. And they were kind of rejected, expelled by the virtue of the queens. Now we have the music of the second witches' dance, and we can see how they made it not a dance. First of all, if you look at the music, we've got several sections. A starts as a fairly straightforward duple time melody. Dum dum ba da 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 dee da dee da 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 dee da dee. But then it goes into something which is not measured, unmeasured music. Da dum, da dum, and you can see it could be extended. Those pause marks are as in the original. Then you get a little snatch of triple time. Dum ba da dum ba dee. Then at D, a piece of cut common time. You can see that mark is in the original, which indicates that it is twice as fast as normal duple time. Da 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 dee. And then lastly, at the E section, we get the start of a conventional Coranto meter. da dum ba da da ba ba bum ba da da ba, etc. But it is going to be broken off, so it won't be a complete dance. Now, that's one way of making it acceptable and not a proper dance. But another way is to sneak the dance into the action. So these 12 witches have just completed 8 charms that they've spoken. And the 9th charm, and of course the whole thing is playing on the potent power of 3, evil power in the hags and virtuous power in the women. If you listen to it, you'll see that you've actually got the rhythm of a double step. About, and about. In other words, step, 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 close or pause, till the mist arise and the lights fly out. Now I've typed this out. Well, this is the way it's typed out, which obscures the fact that there are actually 9 lines, therefore 9 double steps. And at the last stage, it becomes around, 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 around. So you can see that they're moving till a music sound and the pace be found to which we may dance and our charms advance. So they're speaking, they're moving, and then suddenly they're dancing, because this is the same rhythm as section A, to which we may dance and our charms advance. Da dum ba da 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 da. So it's very apparent really how this worked. Now, if we go to Shakespeare's Macbeth, which was from 3 years earlier, a consensus among literary scholars relegates the later witch scenes of Acts 3 and 4 to an interpolation by the playwright Middleton from his play of 1616 after Shakespeare's death, which was called The Witch. And these scenes are spectacular, with song and dance instigated by Hecate, who's a new character, and the influence, therefore, of the Jacobean masque is clear. However, the witch scene of Act 1, Scene 3, which first sets Macbeth on his downfall, is considered to be original to Shakespeare. And I suggest that the dance is a prototype to the later anti-masque witches. Again, I've laid this out into 3 lines rather than 2 groups of 3 lines rather than the 6 in which it's set out. And it has been noticed again by the commentators that the metre of this chant is different from most of the play, and they call it a trochaic tetrameter, having 4 strong beats. The weird sisters hand in hand, posters of the sea and land. So obviously emphasizing it here. Now I suggest that we could envisage the movement that goes with these words of the 3 witches by using the strategies of Hearn and Jonson of 1609. Again, the metre matches that of a double step, 3 firm paces and a close or a pause. So the witches might dance 3 double steps while chanting these first 3 lines. But what about thrice to thine and thrice to mine? Well, they could be, again, 3 double steps, but speeded up as the common time is in the hags of the masque. So that would make it, if you think of thrice to thine, so we've got 3 quicker steps, thrice to thine and thrice to mine, thrice again to make up 9. Peace, the charms wound up, so the metre relaxes because Macbeth and Banquo are entering. If you think of it like that, it physicalizes the 3-some pattern, and obviously Macbeth is playing on that as well. And it also creates 2 more triads by dividing the 6 lines into 2 threes. And you might like to remember in Act 4, Scene 1, it occurs again, round about the cauldron go, right? And the famous refrain that we all know, double, double, toil and trouble. A double step, fire, burn and cauldron bubble. So let's look at this from another angle. So Shakespeare's collaboration with the dancing specialist is particularly apparent in The Tempest, for which a team of dancers must have been employed as supernumeraries to take on a variety of roles throughout the play. They operate as Prospero's spirits to be organised by Ariel. The dancers appear as several strange shapes which help Ariel as a harpy to deliver a banquet with dancing and then remove it with dancing. The text is clear. And the nymphs and reapers who dance the masque, the natural masque, would be the next thing they do. And then the other thing is when they are appearing as in the shape of dogs and hounds driving the monstrous Caliban away. And the text is clear: enter divers spirits in shape of dogs and hounds. The Masque of the Tempest is an example of Shakespeare's manipulation of the court masque to invent a hybrid form. It is, I'm going to have to move on quickly, I think. So the nymphs of the brooks and the sunburnt sicklemen enter to dance in country footing. The reapers are properly habited. They dance a graceful dance according to the text, toward the end whereof Prospero starts suddenly and speaks, after which, in a strange, hollow and confused noise, they heavily vanish. So the nymphs could be dressed just like Anne of Denmark and her ladies in naiad costumes. That's very masque-like and charming, but the reapers are more like anti-maskers in their natural kit, rough and ready. The dance, we are told, is in country footing. Well, we don't know what that means, but that is not a court dance. It's graceful, but it's in country footing. And then, of course, the important thing is the dance is stopped in full swing like an anti-mask dance, and they disappear to the same sinister sound of music as the witches. So it's neither a masque nor an anti-mask in presentation, but a new development. Now, as a dance historian, it seems to me that such a troupe of dancers requires someone to devise the dances and mind action, to recruit the dancers and to rehearse them, and keep them in practice for further performances. In other words, a dance director or choreographer, to collaborate with Shakespeare and fellow dramatists. And Jeremy Hearn, the inventor of the first anti-masque in 1609, was employed as a dancing master on the court musical establishment, but was the only one not assigned as a tutor to one of the royal family, and didn't show any evidence of notable abilities as an instrumentalist. There was something special about him, as he remained in a very lucrative post from 1608 until 1640, when he died. And there are sufficient threads of evidence to add to the court records for payment to trace him through his residences in London and even his birth in Hemel Hempstead in 1586. And weighing up various clues to his contribution, I propose that Hearn may have commenced his career as a Blackfriars boy, like Nathan Field here, who's got a fuller biography. He would have had a good dance and music training, and also have worked with Jonson, Middleton, Marston and Chapman in their plays with dance elements. So I suggest that it is a possibility that he assisted Shakespeare in devising the actions of the witches in Macbeth in 1606 at age 20, making a first experiment with disturbed and uneasy measures to represent evil. And there's other evidence of his work with other choreographers, dramatists. Now I come to my final point. In Shakespeare's lifetime, stage players were the only dance professionals. They had to be ready to dance court dances, such as the Galliard, as female characters, vernacular dances, such as the Jig and Morris, and theatrical forms. And we all know Will Kemp. And even a dancer gives the epilogue to the play of Henry IV, Part 2. By 1640, when the court disbanded in the face of civil war, the increase in dancing on the public stage and in the court anti-masque had led to a new profession of specialist dancers, and possibly there's one here in this image of 1662, capable of depicting character and action without the need for words. So Shakespeare had been a contributor to this important development in English dance theatre. So, and just finally, a few suggestions for further reading. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anne, for such an interesting talk, beautifully illustrated. And it's a sign of a good talk, I always think, when it leaves you wanting more. And I want to hear a lot more about masques and Henry VIII banning. I didn't know that. It was fascinating. And I'm sure everyone enjoyed it. Now, we just got 10 minutes ideal for questions. Our first question was at 7:15. Can you expand on where and when less exalted people, such as the Aguecheek level, might do Galliards? Presumably lots did, or Shakespeare wouldn't have used the puns so much.
Well, it was just the main dance form. Sorry, are you right? Yeah. It was just the main dance form for all kinds of dancing. So they were gentry, Sir Andrew Aguecheek and Sir Toby Belch, so they would have danced at home, they would have danced at revels, at other occasions. Yeah, it would have just been a very common thing and would have learnt them as boys. Okay,
thank you. And then we have one from Harry Hayfield, who seems to recall a reference that Henry VIII masked Anne of Cleves as a courtship ritual, and was this common for courtships? And you mentioned yourself Anne Boleyn when Henry VIII came in and danced with her. So was this something that was common?
Well, a masque would set up an encounter. So a regular ball, you knew who was invited, and the guests were all known to each other. If you had a masque coming in as a special event, those maskers coming in would not necessarily have been aware altogether of who else had been invited. So that's why what Shakespeare is playing on in the Anne Boleyn thing, it's got a certain element of chance, which the notion being he may not have noticed her otherwise, but it wasn't a courtship ritual or anything. No, it was more because there was this theatrical element. But a ball had the chance to meet other people.
Okay, thank you. If anybody has questions, please do type them in the chat box. I've just one more here. Someone asks, I've heard you are planning a Shakespeare weekend at Hallsway Manor in January. Can you tell me more about that, please?
Yes, the Historical Dance Society has booked Hallsway Manor again for the weekend of January the 7th to the 9th, 2022, and it will have the theme of Shakespeare and the dances in the play. As we've done before, there will be two classes, there'll be the chance to learn dances with Anne Hinchcliffe for those who are more beginner level, and with those with some more experience with me, so that you learn some repertoire, and then we will explore certain scenes and see how they might have been put together in the day, in Shakespeare's day, which they're not obviously done so much nowadays with historically informed way. And we will have some musicians present to assist. So there'll be a certain amount of freedom of choice as to what you might like to do on that front.
That's excellent. Any more questions, please? I think you must have told them everything.
Oh dear.
Well, that's a good sign, isn't it?
Summed them into silence.
Okay, while I'm waiting, our next lecture is on August the 18th. So we're having a rest in July. So just keep your eyes open for that one. I won't spoil it by telling you what it is. And we look forward to seeing everybody there. It doesn't look like there's any more questions.
Oh, right. Come on. Come on.
You've got 6 minutes left if you would like to say anything else.
I've run out of things myself. Well, I think the thing obviously is when you're interested in the dancing, you try to work out a bit more about how the players learned and what the training was. All the specialists on Shakespeare don't touch on dancing. They just don't seem to think it needed any practice. They gloss over quite a number of dance scenes. I mean, you get a lot of references to dance, but you also have many occasions when dancing is meant to be happening. I mean, even the Romeo and Juliet scene, there's some sort of dance must have been going on. So what was it? And you know, you've even got a little guide as to how many people were coming in with Romeo, and you need some matching people. And even then you think, well, that's not, they're not normally, they are probably not members of the regular company, the Lord Chamberlain's men. If you're to fill a stage with a few more bodies, you're going to have to hire in some supernumeraries, some hired men. And of course, that is all kind of lost to history too. But I find it really annoying that dramatists, those who are interested in drama historians, really don't address dance at all and how they might have come to it.
And there's so much communication in dance, isn't there? So much language, the messages and whatnot, that surely it must have played a part.
Yes, yeah. And I mean, just to emphasize too that when you do some careful methodical research into the dance scenes and the masques, well, particularly the masque scenes in plays of the time, Shakespeare was the first to do it. And again, that's been sort of overlooked. And also, along with Middleton, he was the only one who used them as they were, as social encounters, as social scenes. Because the later thing, which interests drama historians a lot more, is when they're used for sinister things, when people get assassinated in masques and murder takes place. He doesn't use it for that.
We've got one final question from Emily here. Oh no, we've got two now. Any thoughts on whether dancing might have been staged while the dancers or bystanders were talking, or alternating talking and dancing? So were they?
Yes, I think there probably was. I mean, we have to just look very carefully at the extant scripts, really, to fill it up. But I think you mustn't forget the economics of the theatre of the time. There weren't that many bodies that you could afford to pay to come on board, and the companies were quite
so you have
small.
to do both.
I can see there was one more question, but I would like to throw in one of the things that I didn't have time to emphasize was in the Love's Labour's Lost, the king says, release, give me a measure and one change. And that is something, a phrase, measures with changes, that crops up in other plays of the time. So, and one of the vision scene in Henry VIII, All Is True, has a thing where the dancers are doing, they say, a measure with changes in it. So I thought at Halsey, one of the things that it needs exploring, because I'm still not quite sure what's going on there, is this business of measures with changes. And what a change is. So it's a mystery. So there's a mystery we ought to follow up. So yes.
Well, the final question then from Drew, and where were musicians on the stage or off the stage, in the gallery, or where were they? Do you know where they were?
I think with the if you take Shakespeare's plays, then most of the historians of the Shakespeare stage think that they were up in the musicians' gallery. So they're up above. There's not a lot of room on the floor. If you're thinking of an actual mass, which of course was not what Shakespeare did, then the musicians were in clusters on the dance, near the dance floor, because the stage was actually for scenery.
Okay. Yeah, we saw on the photograph that you had them coming in the door, didn't we? The musicians were
Yes,
behind the
yes. My
two people.
first slide, it was a drawing by C. Walter Hodges of how it might
Yes.
have been
Yeah,
shown
not a photograph, obviously.
in the Blackfriars Theatre.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you very much. And I'm sure I've enjoyed it immensely, so I'm sure everybody has, and look forward to seeing everybody again. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Bye-bye, Anne.
Bye.